it became clear to me that the idea that markets were going to be the solution to everything, that relying on free markets was all you needed, was simply not true because not all the choices were on the table. You can't walk into a grocery store and buy world peace or reduce infant or maternal mortality or end hunger or protect the environment. These public goods require community action. So, Kate Rayworth developed an economic model which goes beyond simple reliance on the free markets. Her model shows the global issues which should be addressed to take fully responsible decisions. Rayworth's donut economics used the sustainable development goals for the hole in the donut
Mm.
to show what needed to be done so that everyone could live a full life. And she used planetary boundaries for the outside of the donut. And I'll be explaining to you about planetary boundaries. In 2009, Johan Rockström of the Resilience Institute in Sweden did a paper that showed 9 things that could go wrong that could possibly do us all in. And those are called planetary boundaries, and they are of a nature that if you get into the range where you're in trouble, and it can at any time do you in. So I've adapted that model for a safe space for religious freedom. So our donut is that safe space for religious freedom. And the hole in the donut has 2 aspects. One is nation states that are a threat to religious freedom, and the other is global situations, which are, I'll cover by giving you an update on where we stand with the Sustainable Development Goals. Um, so the um, the U.S. Commission on Religious Freedom was established by the International Religious Freedom Act of 1998, as amended by the Frank R. Wolf International Religious Freedom Act of 2016. And the commission has offices in Washington on North Capitol Street and is funded by the federal government. So there are 9 commissioners chaired by Nuri Turkel and a professional staff of 20 with Aaron Singh Chinook as executive director. So there's 20 people who are looking at nations around the globe to see what they're doing about religious freedom. And you've already heard this if you've heard my last um, talk, but I'm just going to touch on this. The annual report for 2023 documented 17 countries with particular concerns and 11 on the special watch list. That meant that they were not quite so terrible, but they needed to be watched. And then 17 entities of particular concern. That would be like ISIS. And during 2022, the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom issued 33 reports, held 8 hearings, and produced 42 podcasts. These countries and special entities are a threat to religious freedom, and they're represented in the center of the donut. So I'm giving you that so you can do your own research on this if you like. Now the 17 Sustainable Development Goals follow the 8 Millennium Development Goals. Those Millennium Development Goals focused on the needs of developing countries and extended from the year 2000, the millennium, to 2015. So they were given 15 years to be achieved. And of course, they were not achieved. Um, so they were followed by the Sustainable Development Goals. The concept of sustainability was expanded beyond just environmental issues to include, that's my kitty Mick, to include economic well-being and social well-being. Uh, and this was explained by Jeffrey Sachs in his book, The Age of Sustainable Development. Millions were consulted by the United Nations in developing these sustainable development goals. They expanded from 8 to 17, and there are 169 targets to improve accountability for these goals. So I rely on the Sustainable Development Solutions Network for information, and the UNSDSN.org is the website where you too can become an expert, such as I am. The report is their ninth, and they want it referred to as Sachs, LaFortune, and Fuller, the SDGs, and the UN Summit of the Future Sustainable Development Report 2024. Now, at Summit of the Future that is coming up at the United Nations, it's a huge meeting in the fall, and a lot of people are hoping that it will initiate a reform of the UN institution and possibly not just strengthen it, but create some new possibilities. In the preamble to the report, they say, we take sustainable development to be the guiding principle for our age, as summarized by the 5 Ps: people, planet, prosperity, peace, and partnerships. People signify the commitment to leave no person, no group, no nation, and no religion behind. Planet signifies the challenge of living within the planetary boundaries. Prosperity signifies the commitment to extend material benefits of modern education and technology to all parts of the world and to all member states of the UN. Peace signifies the vital commitment by all nations in the nuclear age to live together under the UN Charter and international law, including the duty of non-intervention in the internal affairs of other nations and the duty of peaceful resolution of conflicts guided by international law. Partnerships signifies the commitment by all stakeholders, including governments, civil society, and business organizations, to work together cooperatively, honestly, and ethically to achieve the shared goals of humanity. So you can see that the Sustainable Development Solutions Network is very idealistic, and I'm sure we support that. Um, The report projects that only 16% of the targets, those 169 targets, will be met by 2030 and recommends that the completion date be extended to 2050 and that plans be made so that we can realistically hope to achieve the goals by 2050. So, for example, by 2030, there'll still be 800 million people who are hungry. Now, the paths forward that are discussed in the report, and by the way, the report is over 500 pages. It takes a while to read it. Trust me, I did it. Paths forward are discussed in 3 scenarios: the current situation, countries cooperating to make better progress, excuse me, and global institutions are strengthened and created, including global financial architecture. That last part, global financial architecture, addresses a huge problem for the least developed countries, which simply do not have the money to invest to do much of anything about the sustainable development goals. The Summit of the Future is a unique and vital opportunity for the world community to update and upgrade the United Nations to meet the great challenges of the 21st century. We are midway between the founding of the UN in 1945 and the year 2010. This is a key moment to take stock of the accomplishments and limitations of the UN to date, and to update and upgrade the UN institutions for the balance of the century. The UN Sustainable Development Solutions Network is pleased to present the recommendations for United Nations 2.0 as a contribution to the upcoming summit. This statement and the work of many individuals listed at the end of this statement. And I can tell you that there are about 100 people who are listed, eminent persons who have been working with Jeffrey Sachs. Jeffrey Sachs has been in leadership in this area for many years, starting with his work with Kofi Annan. Pardon me. I'm hopeful that my voice will last, but it's tricky, isn't it? So these are the things that they're asking of the Summit of the Future. The Sustainable Development Goal agenda should remain the core of the global cooperation until 2050. The Sustainable Development Agenda should be properly financed, and that's, of course, the global financial architecture. Countries and regions should produce medium-term sustainable development strategies. So instead of just kind of floundering around, we not admitting that we have an issue, we actually come up with a strategy in various contexts. Um, the principles of non-intervention should be reinforced and extended. Now, for example, having a member of the Security Council attacking another country might be an example of that not working at the moment. The UN Security Council and other UN agencies should be strengthened to keep the peace and sustain the security of member states, kind of on the same point. The nuclear powers should return to the process of nuclear disarmament. Systematic monitoring of UN-based multilateralism should take place. As it turns out, in their ranking of countries, the US comes in at the bottom in terms of multilateralism. Enhancing the multilateral governance of technological risks. So things like IA should have a global approach to making sure that it doesn't become a dangerous thing. Universal access to vital technologies, universal access to R&D capacities and platforms, universal education for sustainable development and global citizenship, a council of youth and future generations. There should be the establishment of a UN Parliamentary Assembly, and other UN subsidiary bodies should be established. And there's a whole slew of those, and out of respect for my voice, I'm not going to go into that, but it covers indigenous peoples, Council of Cities, Council of Regions, Council of Culture, Council of Youth, and Future Generations, and basically an environmental council. The Security Council should be reformed in membership and powers. So, for example, there are many very large countries like India or parts of the world like South America and Africa that simply are not represented on the Security Council, and that in the way that the 5 permanent members are, and that has been a subject for debate for some time now. So, okay, I'm going to give you some of the specifics on sustainable development goals. For the goal of no poverty, we still have 7.5% of people on the planet who are below $2.15 a day in income. And if you extend that to $3.65 a day, it goes up to 14.6%. So you can see that there's a good portion of people at the bottom. As for the goal on zero hunger, um, the president's of stunting in children under 5 years of age is about 20%. The uh, prevalence of wasting in children under 5 years of age is 7%. Now, The Economist recently had an article about how this affects children's mental capabilities and how many points and IQ points it produces when they go through this in the first 1,000 days of their existence. And it points out that for $2 billion, which amounts to 1/4 of 1% of global product, that could be addressed effectively. Good health and well-being, which general mortality is 130 N per 132 per 100,000 live births. Neonatal mortality is 12.6 per 1,000 live births, and the mortality rate for under fives is for 25 per 1,000 live births. Life expectancy at birth is 71 years globally, and there you have it. Quality education. Participation rate in pre-primary learning of children aged 4 to 6 is 75%. Looks pretty good globally, unless you're part of the 25% that isn't in it. Net primary enrollment is 93%, and lower secondary completion rate is actually 85%, and the literacy rate globally is estimated at 93.4%. So that actually looks pretty decent. Gender equality, demand for family planning satisfied by modern methods is 74%, before 26% of people are not getting that. The ratio of female to male and years of education is 85%. And the ratio of female to male in the labor force participation rate is 2/3. Clean water and sanitation, pardon me, population using basic drinking water, having at least basic drinking water is 91%. Now, mind you, you have to look at the definition, which means that if there's a well within a mile of your house, you're considered to have adequate access. That's not really the best, in my humble opinion. And population using at least basic sanitation services is 80%. That 20% is then very much susceptible to disease. When I was in India as a person doing hazardous substances, I came to know that human waste was the most dangerous substance in India based on confirmed kills. Let's see now. You can look at the report and get the other details. And I'm going to move on to the planetary boundaries. Planetary boundaries, as I said, was first in an article in Science magazine led by Johan Rockström. And he pointed out 9 areas, excuse me, where we were going to be in trouble. And of course, climate is one of the most important areas. And right now we are at 417 parts per million. And the range for danger is 350 to 450. So we're well over the bottom of the range, and we're headed for the top on climate change. So that's quite a current concern. And ocean acidification is a really huge thing because it measures the degree of acidification in the ocean. And if it gets beyond a certain level, the algae at the very bottom of the ocean, which support all the rest of ocean life, will die. And that is, I'll just give you the numbers without trying to get into the measurement, but it's 2.75 is the safe level, and 2.8 is where we are. So we're beyond that already. So we're risking huge upset to the food supply and to ocean life with ocean acidification. And the other area where we're really out of whack is in the nitrogen cycle. And in the nitrogen cycle, the safe level is 82 teragrams, and we're at 190 teragrams of stuff going into the ocean. So I'm going to bow to the gods and let folks ask questions. That's a bit of a shortened presentation, thanks to the inadequacies of my voice.
Okay.
John, you're muted.
I kept wanting to hand you a glass of water, but I couldn't do that.
You're very kind.
Or something stronger, whatever would help your voice.
I hear you.
I obviously, perhaps the quickest thing that the average person in the world could do would not have more than 2 children. And I think when women are free to do what they wisely choose to do, often that cuts it way down. But obviously, we have still very strong cultural proclivities, many places in the world, throughout the world, to have lots of children. And I mean, that's great if you have more or less unlimited funds and resources, but for the rest of the world, that's certainly not the case, and it won't be the case probably for a long time. So, I mean, that's sort of the thing that the world could do, but how to get them to do it, aside from liberating women and providing the means for birth control throughout the world.
Excuse me, the demolitionist of it is that having lots of children is the retirement plan in places that have huge poverty. So a solution is to have more jobs available, more economic wherewithal, and that will automatically reduce the birth rate, I believe.
That's it.
Yeah, I noted that the what I don't know what the organization is called, but they've done this project drawdown, and they've come up with 84 things that can be done with current technology to save the environment and the climate. And they don't mention restricting births, but they do say that you can choose, it's not like you have to do all 84 to win, let's call it win. But you can do some of them. And their analysis showed that if you educate women and give them the power to control their own bodies, that could take care of 40% of the problem, of the challenge
Wow.
that we have. So, that's probably is another way of looking at the same thing, but and I think, it's similar to what you were saying, John, but maybe, I guess telling people have fewer children, is that's hard to hear for a lot of people. So this is another way of looking at it, and if people get to make their own choice. But, there are just basic things that our government and other governments could do to get rid of fossil fuels, and that would take care of a huge amount of it. That's where I am totally focused.
Well, I'd like to confess that in my community, what people are doing is not using plastic straws. And
Yeah.
that's a good example of how individuals really can't do effective things as effective as governments can, as you point out. Governments in the US, we have a huge subsidy for fossil fuels in our tax code. And we have a huge subsidy for unsustainable agriculture in our tax code, in our federal budget. And it takes that kind of community action to make a big difference.
Stephen,
Yeah, George, that was a great presentation. The end was a bummer. And I'm wondering, do you have the presentation you just gave available that you could PDF it?
I do have it available. It's rough notes, but I'd be happy to send it to you.
I would sure appreciate it. There's a lot of stuff in there that I would like to be able to pass on to the people who follow me.
Yeah, understand. My pleasure.
And I think one of the obstacles when we talk about, people using paper straws rather than plastic straws, that alone won't do it, but that by itself does make a difference. But one of the things that I find a lot of people seem to think that, all right, so I don't use a plastic bag. What about? And you get all the what about isms. What about Exxon and what they're doing? What about British Petroleum and what they're doing? How does my little not using a plastic straw really make a difference? And that's where grassroots makes, to me, all the difference.
Politics is real important.
And you're muted, Betsy.
In my opinion, it's all about BP and Exxon and their cohorts. And we can make tiny steps, but they're not going to take us very far. We got to get So I won't go talk about that.
hi, Luke. Would you like to say something?
Hi, John. It's nice to see everyone. It's actually 2 a.m., so I'm not at my brightest at this point. But it's very interesting, and I like how you emphasize the systemic nature of those problems. And John, don't let any right-wingers hear you, because they will just find confirmation of their crazy depopulation and chemtrails and whatnot theories when you talk about people having fewer children. But of course, I agree with you. The thing is, you cannot make people have fewer children. The Chinese tried it, they did it, and it resulted in horrible things happening to women mostly, but many tragedies. People living without identity, basically, or state recognized identity, because they were not allowed to be born, so they were born outside of the system and so on. But I think as societies become more affluent and people have more ability to pursue education and careers and that it happens naturally. So we have the opposite problem in Japan, in Europe, in the US to a certain extent. So um, yeah, but I agree. But about the systemic thing, so what always baffles me, and is you mentioned both our agriculture, which is not sustainable. You mentioned uh, George, how many people suffer hunger in the world, and we always say that economy or economics is about managing scarce resources. And what always baffles me when I look sort of at the big picture is, aren't we creating artificial scarcity at this point in our civilization? Because the efficiency of both labor and the means of production, to speak in Marxist terms, has skyrocketed the last couple of decades. Once you needed, I know, I don't have the numbers, but say you needed X people to feed 100 people, and now you need X by thousands probably to feed 100 people, and we waste so much food. And this, so I think we have enough resources to provide everyone on Earth with some basic level of life quality, like food, nutrition, housing, shelter, healthcare, access to information. Um, so it is a choice, I think, a systemic choice that we make, that we don't do it because, of course, we in the West, um, our system depends on exploiting cheap labor and so on, instead of investing in new technologies which can further improve the efficiency of labor. So I support some things like universal basic income, for example, because it changes the way we think about what work is, and about ever increasing the rate of growth of our GDP and so on and so on. But of course, sorry, I'm. It's not new ideas that I talk about. It's been around for decades at this point. But in this context, I think, and I wanted to ask you, Betsy, specifically. The last thing I want to say. Sorry. Um, do you support nuclear investments in nuclear power? I don't mean power in the sense of political power, but simply electricity generation, basically, as one of the ways to solve the climate crisis.
You're
Betsy,
muted, Betsy.
you're muted.
Sorry.
Just move in.
I have not made a firm decision about that. At times it does seem like that's going to be necessary, and yet the same problems that we had 30 years ago still exist, what to do with the waste and all that kind of thing. So, but here's one thing that I will do, and what I will report to you what I learn. So, Bill McKibben recently reported that the state of California, pretty much all spring, virtually every day in the spring, ran totally unsustainable electricity. They needed to provide electricity to homes, schools, etc. They needed zero fossil fuel, and even in the night, there is currently enough battery capacity to save up power during the day, that they didn't need to generate any by fossil fuel in the nighttime either. Now that was just the spring, but this is a huge state. So what I don't know is when they said renewable, I don't know whether they were including nuclear. So I'm going to look into that. But if California can do it without nuclear, maybe we all can. It needs a lot of infrastructure. But there, in this country now, there's a lot of funding for infrastructure. So hopefully we can get there pretty fast.
Much is going to depend on the upcoming election.
Yeah, yeah.
I want to say, Luke, that I think you're better at 2 a.m. than I am in the height of my day at this point. And that's why we need a lot more younger people in IARF and in power. I think the whole thing that's going on right now in the United States in terms of our political gerontocracy is a very useful debate. Probably should have happened a lot earlier, but it's happening now. And I want to be sure that everybody that wants to ask a question or make a comment has a chance to do so. Am I missing anyone that wants to speak up? I think we're very privileged to have Lisa with us today. She probably was more concerned about her dad's voice than I was even. I think that a lot more of the world needs to think about enough. You know, we're finding that we do very well with 500 square feet for the two of us. And I mean, just for instance, if you started charging people taxes on the basis of how many square feet they had, probably would change the housing market remarkably in a short period of time. So I guess I feel like on the macro level, we really need to go international, as I think George is basically pointing out. And that means probably some ways overwhelming nationalism and really empowering international agencies and international groups, you know, like the European Union. I think the European Union is a great example. And of course, right now it looks like it's also somewhat under attack. So there's always these counter movements. But I think on the macro level, some of that has to happen. Certainly environmentally, that's the way it will be, will succeed. I mean, we have to succeed together. You can't have one nation doing one thing and another nation going the opposite direction. But I think some way we also need a change of consciousness. And I guess I feel like that's a place where religious groups and groups like IRF that are avowedly international have a real opportunity to say, you know, let's rethink this. Let's rethink, you know, what we should have, what we do deserve, when we can say, no, this is enough, and we don't want any more. And I am no better than anybody else at that. You know, I love all the fresh fruits, and I buy them because I can afford to buy them, but and vegetables. But you know, that's probably means that it's changing the economy in Chile in the winter and so on and so forth. So you know, that seems to me some of the things that we have to struggle with, and maybe IRF can struggle with. Are there other questions or comments? Next month, the speaker is going to be my son. His training was at Stanford in environmental engineering, and he now works for Rewiring America, which got part of the huge recent legislation grant. So I think they have $2 billion or something like that to help distribute around the nation. And he's working with states and regions and governors and legislators and mayors and so on to electrify their whole communities when possible. So he's on the firing line. He's by the standards of we who are here today, a young person at 48 and in the midst of his career. And I think you'll find him very interesting, and he will be talking on sustainable energy for the world's future.
John,
Yes.
what exactly is the scope of rewiring? That sounds like everybody gets a wire. I mean,
Well, I mean, part of it is simply helping places that aren't electrifying to electrify. His organization, I think, is not so much involved in actually, deciding whether it would be nuclear or geothermal or wind power or these things. That's not the emphasis of their organization. They're really working with public political figures, trying to get legislative change and systems change at a local and regional and state level. But Cooney, turn on,
Tony, you're muted.
unmute.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Is that starting from 8 o'clock or 8:30? I'm sorry, no. 4 o'clock or 4:30?
Next time, it's going to be 4 to 5 Pacific time. So
Yeah,
whenever that is.
I just one question, I live in the Midwest, not East Coast and West Coast.
Right.
Midwest is so cold. Come from the Vice President Vance, so called the last belt, last blue belt. So that's why United Nations or such an idea is very far from grassroots. Of course, college, university, yes, we are talking about. But grassroots people, those are last blue belt or last, such a Midwest, the Trump area. But I'm always struggling how to bring such a United Nations idea as their own life context, different from the East Coast and West Coast. You are living in a very much blue East Coast and West Coast. But my area is come from Vice President Vance area. But I am struggling how to contextualize the United Nations in their grassroots life,
I do.
That's
Here
why.
you go. It's like this. If you want to have the table where global decisions are made be dominated by the Russians and the Chinese, by all means get the United States out of the United Nations. But if you want to have a seat at the table, you gotta participate. And that's
Okay.
true for everybody.
That's right.
You,
Okay, thank you.
mind you are at the home of people who worry about blue helmets and black helicopters. I totally sympathize with you.
Okay.
Even
One of the
Thank you. Excellent advice.
One of the things,
It's a very sorry, Stephen.
yeah, the first of all, Christianity is very strong in the Midwest, and the whole those people who are Christians that are all in on the whole idea of protecting the earth are the ones who sign on to the idea that the earth is a gift that was given by God, and it's our responsibility to care for it. And at the same time, when you get to the Midwest, every focus in the Midwest is much more local, I think. You've got your talking heads on the East and West Coast, but attention is being really focused on my neighborhood, my neighbors, my town, maybe my state. And being able to somehow tie the context of our planet is essentially a small town. And you may want to worry about the environment where you are, But at the same time, if you live in a house and the neighbors next door are throwing all of their trash out in their front, and the whole neighborhood is stinking, then you're going to want to do something about it. Well, there are some areas of our planet that are stinking. And the smell is eventually going to get to that little neighborhood. So there needs to be a way to translate, I feel, the fact that there's something going on. You know, millions of children are dying in Africa, for instance, in Somalia, and, you know, where you've got these civil wars going on. Well, I live in Des Moines. Why should I care about a bunch of people dying over? Well, it's because if your children were dying and starving, all of a sudden it would be real for you. So don't
That's
wait for that to happen. When George gave us those statistics on the oceans, that sent a chill through me. Because if we lose the ocean, nothing else matters. And those are the kinds of statistics that need to be gotten out there. I don't care what religion you are. You know, if the planet goes to hell, whether you're praying in a mosque or a Buddhist temple or a Lutheran church, we're all going to die together. So the
Thank you.
interconnection is so vital. And somehow there needs to be a way to be able to talk to the Midwest and say, God gave you this. What are you doing to take care of it?
Mm.
Because that's the only way things are going to change, when people take seriously. You know, I put out on Facebook every time there's another. I grew up in Philadelphia. There were never tornadoes in Philadelphia. And now there are tornadoes in my little town that I grew up in. There's tornadoes. It's real. And people can bury their heads in the sand or the dirt or whatever, but it's real. And every time there's a flood, I just put on Facebook, are you tired of it yet?
Mhm.
George Williams is with us and wants to talk. George, unmute yourself.
Hello, everyone. I'm sorry. I was at a meeting downtown on Hawaiian worship access issues, and I got back late, and I really see that I missed a very important and George, you must have really presented a great meeting, because you got everybody going in dialogue right now. My apologies.
Glad you're here, though, George,
Yeah.
our international president.